morning, everybody. Hope you all are doing well today, and hope you made it safe wherever it is you needed to go. It's a bit snowy here in Boone, but I hope it's a little bit better where you are, provided you're not in Boone, obviously. I do want to mention a couple things before we get started in talking a little bit about Cialdini and the notion of reciprocity. First things first, though, do remember that you do have a paper that is due by Friday at 11:59 p.m. The Dropbox is up and ready to roll, so please make sure to submit as soon as possible with your definitional piece if you have not done so already. I'll look to potentially grade these sometime over the weekend or maybe into a little bit of next week. So be on the lookout for that, but again, make sure you complete that. Today, provided I have the book, I don't know that I brought it. Oh no, it's right over here. I'm just looking at the wrong side. Today I want to look over a little bit of Cialdini, and we've only really touched based on one principle Cialdini's mentioned right now, and that's that fixed action pattern that I had you do discussion boards on. And fixed action patterns are a great thing to be talking about, and we're going to be kind of alluding to them as we go along through this semester because they're extremely important in terms of the nature of why we do things the way we do. But we're today going to get into the first of six. This is going to be our mini series here. First of six weapons of persuasion, as Cialdini calls them. And the first one that has been kind of a stretch in terms of the rest of the material for this chapter, and for the chapters for this week. But I think it's still one of the most important ones, and one of the ones I really wanted to talk about today is the notion of reciprocity. And I start off by talking about reciprocity from one of my favorite TV shows, is Game of Thrones. So if you've ever watched Game of Thrones, you know that there is a principle by one of the houses. So every family has what they call a house name. And so this one in particular was called House Lannister. And also part of this is like a medieval words in terms of having a banner and a slogan to define their house. So it's, again, very medieval, very identity-driven. And one of theirs, now granted for theirs is Hear Me Roar, because their sigil is a lion. But the kind of unofficial slogan, and the one they say quite frequently through the show, is a Lannister always pays his or her debts. And it's an interesting concept because when you really start to think about it, it doesn't sound that intimidating until you realize kind of the implications of what it might be actually talking about. So if you have your Cialdini book, this may make sense in terms of why the notion of paying somebody's debts is so powerful. So tiny little background information about their, quote, family is that they are extremely rich. They're very powerful. And one way they get power is through not only, in a lot of ways, by force in terms of waging war against other houses in the show, but the other thing they do is they do what they say they're going to do. They always pay back their debts. In fact, in several episodes in the season, one Lannister or a couple Lannisters are indebted to somebody, and they go out of their way to make sure that they are paid back, so everything's square. And that's the nature of reciprocity. And one of the main things I want to focus on when I talk about this particular section today is the area of leveling the playing field, so to speak, is vital in terms of the notion of persuasion. Because, I always think of reciprocity. When I first started reading this chapter years ago, I almost went into like the Godfather and, making enough that we can't refuse kind of deal. I know that's bad Marlon Brando impersonation. But again, it's the notion that you really can't refuse it to some regard if someone does a favor for you. So the reciprocation rule essentially states that if somebody gives something to us, we feel obligated to repay that debt. And an anthropologist by the name of Richard Leakey, I think his name is, who would consider this rule a reciprocity as a defining factor of what it means to be human, which is kind of severe and really interesting. And he says, we're human because our ancestors learned to share their food and their skills as an honored network of obligation. This is a barter system. So the notion of reciprocity and what it means for persuasion is, if I give you something, I have power, because you will, by some regard, have that obligation to, give that, give something back to me. Whether it be a fair payback, whether it be something over time. There's always this cultural obligation to feeling square. And, the notion of communication as a whole, for the most part, is that we usually like to be liked. We rarely have a set of circle of friends that we just really don't care what they think, and if they don't like us, well, screw them. I mean, and there's some people that really feel that way, but most of us, at least in our inner circle, feel that we want to belong somewhere, and we want to be social, and we want to be with that particular group. And that's difficult to some respect, because, again, being indebted to somebody is that sense of power. And even within those groups, the fact that you want to be liked means that you need to do something in order to repay that debt. So by obligating the recipient to an act of future repayment, the rule of reciprocity allows one person to give something to another with the confidence that it's not being lost. So I don't ever have to actually ask for something back. In fact, it can almost be seen as more powerful for me to ask something and then say, "Oh, I don't need anything in return." I know I'll get back to that example here in a few minutes. But again, being able to barter is a very good thing. But at the same time, sometimes it's the notion of knowing that you have something that you are going to give back to them and something that you're going to get in return makes this process that much easier. And the interesting thing is, going back to Game of Thrones, there's a scene where the two gentlemen are sitting at a table and says, how does the nature of debt work? Or a loan, more specifically. And they mention, we agree on a set upon amount of money, and over time, you pay me back that money with interest. And the other character goes, "Well, what if I don't?" And the one explaining the debt goes, "Well, you have to." And the person says, "Well, what if I don't?" He goes, "This is not the nature of how this works. This is not how debt works, that you just basically blow them off and say, I'm not going to pay you. I'm not going to feel obligated to do anything." And so in this case, Cialdini talks about the nature to fail to conform to the reciprocity rule. And what this means, though, is public disapproval is likely to follow. So if you are given something, whether it be a gift or whatever it may be, if you're given something and then they come back and ask you for help, let's say you're within a group of friends and they may mention what they did for you. Well, you may get into a little bit of problematic discourse with the rest of the group of your friends that might sit there and say, well, you kind of owe this person. You got to fess up and do whatever it is you need to do because you owe that person. And so that's that public disapproval in terms of what it means to fail to conform. And a good example of that is, I keep reading comments in like Facebook and YouTube when I see these overly elaborate promposals or marriage proposals. The gentleman who's proposing to whoever it may be presents it in such a way that it's elaborate. There's dancing, there's choreography, there's a song, there's guitar, they're basically serenading the young lady in this particular instance. And the question always comes up, what if that person said no? What if that person was just like, I appreciate the effort, but I'm not going to? Again, public disapproval. And it was the notion, I was watching this on a React video on YouTube, and again, this was about a promposal of a young man playing a guitar for a girl and asking her to prom. And one of the people reacting to this video said, well, you can't say no. That person, really put in a lot of effort into it. And I said, that's the kicker. You can't say no because of how much effort is being put in. So, this is a notion that is extremely important in terms of understanding how this rule of reciprocity works, especially when you don't pay that person back. Because again, you are technically indebted by the unwritten rules of society in this case. The other thing, and let's flip this on its head a little bit, there's a cross-cultural study, and this by Leakey, I believe still, the reciprocity rule in the other direction. So let's say that if I come in as the person who is giving the favor and refusing any kind of payment. So let's say I do something for, one of my students, and, like I go out of my way to purchase something while I'm in a conference or something, and they offer to pay me, and I say, no, I don't need any payment. That's actually looked at negatively as well, because again, this rule of reciprocity is kind of well known, and this is one of the reasons why I want to talk about persuasion knowledge model on Thursday. This kind of persuasion tactic is really known, so people are kind of skeptical when you refuse payment. You might say, what are they getting at? Because we know the old axiom of nothing in life is free, so obviously they're doing something up their sleeve here. And there's a really cool scene from, I don't know if any of y'all watch Everybody Loves Ray, where one of the characters, his name is Frank, does something really nice for his son's wife, her name's Deborah, and refuses payment. Only the next day to purposely do something really stupid with his wife. So her name's Maria, not Deborah, but Maria. He does something really stupid, and he wants Deborah to take the fall for him. So, but again, that's the whole notion of, no, I don't need any repayment. But I might, basically find yourself in a situation where you need to help me out when that time comes. So, again, intentionally do something stupid because they wanted somebody to feel indebted. And that's an interesting and manipulative way of bringing this case to life here. But what about gifts that we may not want? Do we still feel indebted? And that's something I want you to think about. However, Cialdini would sit there and say, absolutely. Absolutely we do. And we feel, in this case, that regardless if we want it or not, we wanted to make sure that we feel that we still pay them back in some way. Because again, even if it was something we don't like, they went through a lot of trouble to do it. And, think about if you re-gift or if you return it to the store, that may actually, that may break somebody's heart of, the time and effort they put into giving that gift, even if you didn't want it in this case. So you absolutely feel indebted to do something in this case. The other thing is repaid debt in this case also usually has more value than the initial gift itself. So you can think of this in such a way, especially if the notion of time is coming to play. So if you have somebody that has offered, my hair's getting a little crazy. If you have someone that has offered you a significant amount of money and said, I'm going to lend you this money, but you need to pay me back. And I'm not talking about like $10. Let's talk about, $5,000 or something that you could not pay back just yet. But if I repaid that debt and I did it quickly, the grasp of whatever it is no longer there. They can't say, well, I paid you that money and, you're acting like this. To me, I feel kind of betrayed. So, in the notion of time, if you're continuing to do something like this, that person may feel more and more indebted as time goes on. However, there's that loophole of once I repay the debt, I'm no longer within your power. You can't. I can act however I want. I can be as rude as I want to you. Obviously you don't want to, but at the same time, the debt isn't a significant factor anymore. That basically states that we can kind of live our lives in this case, knowing that the debt is repaid. So again, that's that whole concept within the Lannister of, making sure that all of our debts are repaid, because if they are, then we don't owe anybody anything. We can stay in the level of power that we stay in. Because, rising to a great achievement always takes help. And, I look at all the people that have helped me on my way of getting to where I am today. And one of the things that I look at is, again, wanting to pay those people back for the amount of time and effort they've given to me. And that's impossible. A lot of the things they've done, I'm like, there's no price tag I can put on it. But the big thing is being able to stay gratified over the years and thank them when I have the opportunity is, one way I can look in terms of paying their debt. That and, grabbing them a beer at a conference probably doesn't hurt in this case. But the thing is, we, to some regard, know that this rule of reciprocity, whether we call it reciprocity or not, is we know that it's a concept, we know that it's there, and because we know that it's there, we might be skeptical to take the bait in the first place. So this rule can trigger unparalleled cognitive dissonance, which leads to unequal exchanges. So again, I go back to, what if the family member offers a substantial amount of money? And one of the things that may that goes in my cognitive dissonance is I might say, well, I'm just not going to take the money because I know I will be indebted. I'm talking a lot about TV today, apparently. There's an episode of The Big Bang Theory where Penny, one of the girls that is friends with all these scientists, she comes in and says, I need money to pay my rent. Otherwise, I'm going to get evicted. And Sheldon, who's a very type A personality, doesn't get a lot of social conventions, lends her quite a bit of money. I mean, it looked like a substantial amount, a couple $100 at least. And he basically says, you need money, take it. And Penny was taken aback, like, I can't do that. He goes, no, just take it. And she goes, well, I don't know when I'm going to be able to pay you back, but I will. And he goes, of course you will. So he understood it on an elementary level of that there needed to be some reciprocity, that she would eventually pay him back. But the notion is he didn't really hound her about it. He really didn't go out of his way to, make her feel that pressure or, make her feel guilty that she hadn't been paying him back in this case. And so that's really, it's a very kind of sweet moment in this case, and to where his roommate said it was kind of his one redeeming quality is the case where Sheldon doesn't exactly understand the rule of reciprocity of how he could hold it over her head in this case, which again, he never does. Another way the rule of reciprocity, and there's a couple other things before I'm finishing up here. Another way the rule of reciprocity works is so powerful is that we're compelled to overcome our feelings of dislike or suspicion for the person who gives us a gift. Cialdini discusses pushing the gift on something while soliciting donations in return. My alma mater, I'm actually learning my alma mater, does that quite a bit, where they will offer a couple things. Like, I get a Virginia Tech magazine, I get, a couple freebies, and in return, they want donations. Now, granted, talking about the rule of reciprocity, I said, a couple of address labels and Virginia Tech magazines I don't think cost to the $150 that you want me to donate every year. So that doesn't balance in my way. But again, I'm technically indebted in the fact that they send me magazines, they update me on things, and, like I said, I occasionally get like a bumper sticker or, I got address labels this year or something along those lines. And so, again, to some regard, I do feel obligated to be able to donate in this case. And I usually do when I get the opportunity or have the excess money. And by the way, when you graduate from App State, you will always have that from any university. They'll start asking for money, basically saying, "Hey, you had a good time here, even though you paid us to go to school here." We want to make sure that we stay in touch with our alumni. I do actually personally like that. Some of my friends don't, but this is the whole thing within the flowers in one hand and the solicitation being in the other. So the big question is, and this is kind of where I'll start wrapping up here. The big question is, are we powerless to the notion of the rule of reciprocity? And that's difficult to say. Despite the rule's influence, we have the ability to effectively discern, adjust, or simply just say no to reciprocation. Cialdini goes in to say it is essential to recognize that the requester who invokes the reciprocation rule or any other weapon of influence to gain our compliance is the real opponent, or is not the real opponent. The real opponent is the rule. So, what he means by that is, we can flat out reject the whole notion that if somebody's going to give us a favor. So, if we don't want to be indebted and we think someone is going to be giving us something only to be indebted later, in our perspective, then one of the things we can just say is, I'm good. And again, that may seem rude in some cases, but again, you're not in this debt. Now, granted, that means you don't get whatever it is that you are desiring from that person. The other thing is you could just not pay them back, which I don't know if I recommend in a lot of cases, and it really depends on what it is that's being indebted. Sometimes the nature of persuasion, and the best way to get away from some of the tricks, or in this case, weapons from Cialdini, is just say no. And unfortunately, in a lot of ways, that's rude, but it really does depend on how much you really want to be a part of this selective group. Cialdini uses an example that I really liked was Boy Scouts coming door to door, and they were offering chocolate bars. And I don't remember how much they were actually going to ask for, but they started off at saying $5 for a chocolate bar. And Cialdini was like, I'm not paying $5 for a chocolate bar. But lo and behold, like foot and door mentality, as well as revise and retreat in this case, they came in and said, okay, well, what about for $1? And he's like, all right, I can pay you $1. And he gets the chocolate bar, goes into his house and goes, I didn't want a chocolate bar. Why did I pay this? Because it sounded like a good deal. This was the example I used with wine a couple of weeks ago. Is, again, I can sell wine pretty easily by just reducing the price, having it something so outlandish, and then dropping it down. So you feel like you're getting a good deal, even though you may not have even wanted it. I do that at grocery stores a lot. In end caps, for instance, this is good marketing right here. At end caps, I'll walk by and see something and it says, it's half off, and I'm like, awesome, let's buy it. I have no intention on eating or drinking whatever it was that was on sale, but because it was a good deal, that's why I felt inclined to buy it. So if we feel like we're being tricked, then Cialdini recommends that we redefine the initial favor, so we no longer feel the need to respond with a favor of concession. So again, a lot of this is blunt. A lot of this is just trying to be just politely saying no, in terms of what's being given, in terms of, again, how we can be indebted. And this is an important rule to understand within his weapons of influence. Again, it's one of the most difficult ones to get out of once you're in, because of the notion of feel indebted. So think about this. Think about some opportunities that, or sometimes that this has happened to you. Don't think of opportunities where you can purposely put somebody in debt, because believe me, the more we listen to some of this stuff within persuasion, the more you're going to start figuring out some interesting ways to mess with people, and you can start to see it. Again, I was buying a car not too terribly long ago. And, having this book as well as some of the skills that I've gained over the years in terms of understanding persuasion really helped in terms of some of the strategies they use. So a lot of this is just, it's again, skills based, where you recognize where someone's trying to kind of play you a little bit. So that's it for today. Like I said, I hope you enjoyed this rule for reciprocity. I love these weapons of influence. They're really cool, and there's a lot of really interesting ones in there. Scarcity is one of my favorites, for example. I got a really good example for that. Again, make sure that you're turning in your project on Friday. I'll stress that again on Thursday. And on Thursday, I will be posting up an As You Learn, another video on persuasion knowledge models. So again, what if we know we're being influenced? And what strategies do they take when people know they're influenced? So it's very meta in this case. It's like meta persuasion. So I hope you all have a wonderful day. Again, stay warm, stay safe, and I will see you all on Thursday. Thanks.